air it out. Down the field. Catch and a touchdown.
It's College Football Pick'em, presented by Harbor Jiu Jitsu on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. Here's your host, Nick Kosko.
It's College Football Pick'em right on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio, presented by Harbor Jiu Jitsu. I'm your host, Nick Kosko, for another action-packed Saturday of college football as we inch closer to championship weekend. Of course, the postseason and college football playoff. It is now December, on this great Saturday of December 5th of the season. And, well, I'll tell you what, folks, you look at where college football is going right now. We finally have a big ranked matchup for BYU. How about that? As BYU trying to stake their claim to move up in the college football playoff rankings. Meanwhile, everyone else at the top who's actually chasing a legit college football playoff spot has a game this weekend for the most part. And well, anyway, it's kind of it's more so just a countdown clock until we get to championship weekend. Because it seems like within a couple of the Power 5 conferences, we're just waiting on we're just waiting on the conference championship game at this point, because we know who's going to get there. For example, in the SEC, we're looking at Bama and Florida. In the ACC, we're waiting on Notre Dame and Clemson, barring something unforeseen. Big Ten, it looks like it's going to be Ohio State and Northwestern, but the Big Ten's a mess as well in terms of the COVID-19 situation, so we'll dive into that as well. As far as everybody else, the Big 12, I mean, who really cares at this point, because it's Iowa State and looks like, I believe it's going to be Oklahoma, but when you look at that, I mean, what good is going to come out of that? Both teams have 2 losses. The loser's going to have 3 losses, be out of it. And the winner is going to need a lot of help out in front of them in order to make the playoff itself. And then the Pac-12, well, you want to really talk about who cares in terms of the postseason picture, because the Pac-12 is completely out of it, as the highest team from the Pac-12 right now is USC, and they're number 20, and they only played 3 games, and they dropped 2 spots from last week, as Coastal Carolina is in front of USC right now in the college football playoff rankings. So you look at where we're going to go at here for the college football playoff. It's going to be a mixture of the Big Ten, the SEC, and the ACC, and in any sort of fashion, and one conference could get left out for all we know. We could have 2 and 2. Because right now we have 1 SEC, 2 ACC, and 1 Big Ten. But, of course, that could change with a lot of things going on over the next couple of weeks as we lead into championship weekend over the next 2 weeks. So we're going to start with the latest edition of the college football playoff rankings, and also the latest odds, of course, based on within the last couple of days. I shouldn't even say last week, but I mean, before we dive into the games, of course, we'll have my 5-pick segment later in the show. We did have one cancellation, by the way. It was that Coastal Carolina game. They were supposed to play Liberty. Liberty's everyone's darling this year. Only one loss. Hugh Freeze, going to coach himself right back into a Power 5 job. Liberty had COVID issues, and I will just spoil the pick right now, because we had Coastal Carolina minus 11. Malik Willis, the quarterback for Liberty, was not going to be playing due to COVID. He tested positive, so he wasn't going to play, but Liberty ended up canceling the game anyway. So BYU, by the way, as we just mentioned before, they replaced them, so BYU finally gets that highly anticipated ranked matchup, but not with a Pac-12 team or anybody else that we might have expected. But BYU will take the road trip to Coastal Carolina on Saturday. And right now, Coastal Carolina is a plus 10 now. They go from a 11-point favorite to a 10-point dog at home. So we'll talk about that game in my pick segment as well, and what it means ultimately for one of those teams who's going to stay undefeated and one's going to have their first loss. But we'll see what it means in the grand scheme of things in terms of New Year's Six Bowls and, of course, the college football playoff. And, of course, we have plenty of other games to go through in my pick segment and in the upcoming segments as well. Coaching, I mean, the coaching hot seat update, folks. It's Jim Harbaugh going. It's Tom Herman might be the big one now. Jim Harbaugh is basically a weekly conversation, but now Tom Herman over at Texas, it's just getting louder and louder and louder down there. But let's start with the college football playoff rankings as they were this past Tuesday, and the top 4 remains the same. You look at Bama, Notre Dame, Clemson, and Ohio State. They're your 4 in right now. First 2 out, Texas A&M and Florida. Then wrapping up the Top 10, you have Cincinnati at 7, Georgia is 8. They moved up a spot, and that's a little bit, we'll talk about that in a second. Iowa State moved up 4 spots, one of the biggest jumpers of the top 25. Iowa State is now number 9, and Miami stays right where they are at 10. The biggest jump of the week was Oklahoma State going from 23 to 15 after their win over Texas Tech, while the biggest drop was Oregon. They went from 15 to 23. They also dropped 8 spots when they lost to Oregon State last week, so a bad loss there for the Oregon Ducks, and they were probably the only hope out of the Pac-12 to get in, maybe USC, but they've already had some cancellations, so Pac-12, if they had any slim hopes of getting to the playoff, they're gone now, because I don't think USC is going to be able to do enough with just 3 games played and ranked number 20 right now at this current juncture. So the top 10, the top 7 actually remain the same, except for 8 and 9 right after them, and of course Miami stays right at 10. So I found this quite fascinating, and just to give you the latest odds on who's going to win the national championship, I'll give you those top 6, actually. Bama's at plus 125 right now. Clemson plus 250. Ohio State plus 550. Notre Dame plus 600. And then you look at, how about this, the next 2 teams, Florida plus 1,200, Texas A&M plus 1,600. And if you want to really go crazy, put a bet on Cincinnati. Put money down on plus 3,300. Can you imagine that? Put $100 down, and you're going to win 330. It's actually amazing to me. Or excuse me, $3,000. Oh my goodness, I can't do math this morning. Jeez. But in any event, the top 10 is interesting because the top 7 remain the same, and we know who's going to be in contention. Unless something crazy happens for Cincinnati, they might be just stuck at 7. They're going to be stuck in neutral now because they had their game against Temple canceled, and they don't have a game till the 12th, December 12th against Tulsa. Now we outlined it before how Tulsa could help out Cincinnati get to the playoff, right? Now, Tulsa is still ranked 24th. And we'll go over Cincinnati briefly here. Tulsa is ranked 24th. They have a game at Navy today at 3:30. Tulsa wins, fine. They'll be 6-1, 6-0 in the conference, and they're going to, I would say, remain in the top 25. Then they host Cincinnati on the 12th, right? These 2 teams are going to play each other. As long as Tulsa wins, they're going to play each other in the AAC Conference Championship game, the American Athletic Conference Championship game. They'll play, right? And I think they're going to play anyway, actually, based on tiebreakers, no matter what happens to Tulsa against Navy today. So you look at what has to happen for Cincinnati. They need to thoroughly dominate Tulsa twice on the road, and then once at home the very next week in the conference title game to finish 10-0. And that'll at least maybe bump them up to number 6, I would say, as a conference champion. They can go as high as 6, maybe 5, because you look at Texas A&M, they're probably going to keep winning, as far as we know. They're not going to get into the top 4 right away with just winning, because they are not going to be a conference champion in the SEC, because they already have, they have the tiebreaker loss to Alabama. They lost to them head-to-head, remember? So you have to look at it, how does Cincinnati get in? Well, you need Texas A&M to fall off, because if Alabama falls off, right? Say they lose the SEC championship game to Florida, they're probably both going to get in. And then you're in a situation of, all right, do you take both SEC schools, and then say if Clemson beats Notre Dame, which I think is going to happen, do you take both ACC schools? Notre Dame, of course, in the ACC just this year. Do you take 2-2, and then do you exclude Ohio State no matter what happens in the Big Ten, even if they do finish out the season with a minimum of 6 games and then win a Big Ten title and be 7-0? Do you take those 4 teams? At that point, everybody's going to have a loss. 2 conference champs, the 2 conference championship losers. Do you take all 4 of them and exclude, hypothetically, a 7-0 Big Ten champion in Ohio State, an 10-0 Cincinnati conference champion, and of course, a 9-1, 10-1 Texas A&M, who their only loss is to Bama. I mentioned before, Texas A&M's only shot is for Bama to win, so they stay undefeated. Otherwise, you can't risk the chance of having Bama and Florida get in, even though Texas A&M beat Florida head to head. But if Florida gets in, they would have beaten Alabama in the SEC title game. That's just facts, folks. So Texas A&M is almost screwed here. Cincinnati needs to win out, right? They need to dominate Tulsa twice. They would need a team like Bama to win, knock out Florida. It might scoot up Texas A&M. Maybe best to root for Notre Dame. So you have the 1 and 2 spots are undefeated squads, right? So then you knock out Clemson, you knock out Florida, but then you still have Ohio State. Ohio State's still lingering around. At that point, Ohio State, as long as they have enough games and they win the Big Ten title, they'll get in. 1, 2, and 3. Alabama, Notre Dame, Ohio State. You follow? Now, the 4th spot comes down to a 10-0 Cincinnati team, which won their conference and dominated pretty much everybody, except for a 3-point win over Central Florida, which is a good Group of 5 school. And then that 14-point win over Army earlier in the year. Otherwise, they'd beaten everybody by double digits. Under this scenario, let's say they dominate Tulsa twice. Now what do? That 4th spot, are you going to put a 10-0 Group of 5 school, Cincinnati, into that 4th spot? Or are you going to put Texas A&M in? That's the biggest question. That can only happen if you have 3 undefeated Power 5 conference champions in Bama, Notre Dame, and Ohio State. If Ohio State can't make it, then it's a moot point, actually. Because then you're going to have a team like Indiana, which lost their quarterback for the season, represent the Big Ten East, and then Northwestern. And Northwestern already lost. So neither of them is going to make the playoff based on those resumes. Because Indiana is 12 right now, and Northwestern's 14. And Indiana has no guarantee to win again anyway. So I don't think that's going to happen. So if Ohio State's out, then all of a sudden you have 2 spots over. Then I think Cincinnati is automatically in with Texas A&M. Maybe Iowa State makes a case if they win out and win the Big 12, or even Oklahoma sitting there at 11. They're not totally out of it yet. Or even Miami. How about Miami now? If we're taking non-conference championship winners, Miami. They keep winning. Their only loss was to Clemson. But then again, in that scenario, Clemson would be out with 2 losses, but just to Notre Dame. Quality losses, but Miami has a case now. A little bit. But in that scenario, Bama, Notre Dame stay undefeated. Clemson's out. Let's say Ohio State can't make it because they're ineligible for the Big Ten championship game. Now they're out. You slide up the next 2 teams. Florida would already have 2 losses. They'd be out. They lost the head-to-head, by the way, to Texas A&M. Texas A&M's in, probably at 3, and they're going to put Cincinnati right at 4 because they're already above Georgia right now, who has 2 losses, and they're above a potential conference champion in Iowa State, who's 9 right now. Cincinnati does not control their own destiny, but they have to win out, of course. They have to be undefeated. Any loss destroys Cincinnati's hopes. They have to be 10-0, and they have to dominate, I'd say, Tulsa twice. They have to dominate both games. They'll have a shot. They will have a shot. As far as what we saw, the bottom of the top 10, and this kind of really surprises me, this goes back to whether you have respect for Miami or not when it comes to the 8, 9, and 10 spots. And this was kind of huge when it came out on Tuesday that Miami didn't move. Because Miami, again, they're 7-1, top 10 team. They've been pretty darn good all season long. Now, again, they beat UAB, and at the time they thought that they had a quality win over Louisville on the road back in week 2 at the time. Because Louisville was a top 25 team. They dominated Florida State, and again, I know they lost by 25 to Clemson, but since they lost to Clemson, they've won 4 in a row. They beat Pitt by 12. They squeaked out wins against Virginia and NC State and Virginia Tech. The next 3 wins. They're all close wins. So if you want to go by the strength of schedule, yeah, Miami not totally up there, and they had a game against Georgia Tech postponed, but they still have 3 games left in the schedule. They have 3 games left. They can finish 10-1 if they don't happen to make the ACC championship game, which would happen if Clemson loses to Virginia Tech this weekend. They would have to win out, of course, after that, but Clemson would have 2 losses. If Miami only has that 1 loss, they're in. They would get to the ACC title game after all that. But they have Duke and North Carolina coming up, so North Carolina's a quality opponent. But if you're going to go by the strength of schedule, I understand where the committee's coming from, but you mean to tell me they're going to put Iowa State and Georgia above them right now with 2 losses. Now, again, higher quality losses. For Georgia, I could see why. Because their only losses are to Bama and Florida, the number 1 and number 6 teams in the country, respectively. But if you look at Georgia's resume terms of wins. The Arkansas and Auburn wins. The defense won those games, and the offense did enough, particularly against Auburn. They put up 27 points, but the Auburn's offense couldn't do anything against Georgia's defense. Tennessee, I get it. And Tennessee at the time was top 15, but Tennessee is garbage this year. They're 2-5. They're no good. So that win doesn't look as good. The Kentucky win, 14-3. Not that great of a win in my mind. And then the Mississippi State win that happened 2 weeks ago. Mississippi State is nothing compared to what we saw week 1. Not that good. And they beat them only by 7. And they beat up a bad South Carolina team. So the committee to me is weighing Georgia's losses against Miami, against Miami's total resume with lack of quality wins, in my opinion. Just because you look at Georgia's quality losses to Alabama and Florida. But to me, I see 2 double-digit losses. Now again, both these teams could be in the playoff anyway, and Florida could very well beat Alabama in the SEC championship game. But you mean to tell me losing by 17 and then 16, 2 out of 3 weeks, to Bama and Florida is better than Miami being 7-1 with their only loss being a bad loss to Clemson? We'll call it a bad loss. They lost by 25. So 2 quality losses is better than just the 1 quality loss. But if you're not looking at the exact number, they're all double-digit margins of victory. So to me, that was a little eyebrow raising because Georgia was number 9 last week and they moved up a spot. Now Iowa State made the big jump from 13-9 because they won again and they beat Texas and they clinched a spot in the conference title game. And Iowa State has won 4 in a row. I'll give them that. But now you want to really talk about quality of losses here. You look at Iowa State's first game of the year. They lost to Louisiana. Louisiana is no longer ranked. I beg your pardon, they're 25th. They're a good football team this year. They're 8-1. I get they're good. But Miami losing 1 game to the 3rd team in the country by 25 compared to Iowa State losing 2 games, one of them to Louisiana by 17. Iowa State's other loss was to conference opponent Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's 15. So they have 2 ranked losses. Why is Iowa State above Miami? I haven't really heard a solid argument. Again, the wins from Miami aren't the best. But let's look at Iowa State's wins. Now, on paper, 2 quality losses, right? Louisiana and Oklahoma State. But this is where Miami gets screwed here. The fact that they couldn't move up even a spot. Now, they had very slim hopes of getting to the playoff anyway because they already lost to Clemson, and then Clemson ended up losing to Notre Dame. So that really put them in a bind. But after Iowa State lost to Louisiana the first week, they beat TCU. Okay. Oklahoma, they've rebounded. Okay, that's a quality win now. Oklahoma's top 15. They beat them. Texas Tech. Then they lost to Oklahoma State. They beat up Kansas. No big deal. They beat Baylor by 7. Baylor is rebuilding. They shut out Kansas State. Dominating win. Now that caught my attention. I get that. That caught my attention. But they don't have their quarterback. But still, you shut them out, 45-0. I would say that's a quality win because you dominated Kansas State. But the Texas win on the road, it's a road victory, but that really doesn't do anything for me because if you're watching Texas is so Jekyll and Hyde this year, and now they're back out of the top 25. If you're gonna make Texas that big of a quality win, I don't see it. So again, the only reasoning for me is to keep Miami below Georgia and Iowa State is because Miami, since losing to Clemson, has won every game, but by no more than 5 points. Now, either to you, that's just that's signs of luck, or signs of a good football team that can close out close games, that can win these close games. I think it's a little bit of both. Some of those teams they probably should have beaten by a lot more. But on the eye test, I'm looking at Miami as a slightly better quality team than an Iowa State and Georgia. Plus, if you are watching Georgia, who they've beaten in the SEC as of late, especially the last 2 wins, Mississippi State and South Carolina, I don't know what you're watching. If you think that Georgia team is going to contend with Alabama when they already couldn't, you already knew they couldn't. But if you think that Georgia team can they couldn't hang with Bama. Maybe they could hang with Notre Dame, but Notre Dame's shown that this season's different, at least so far. You know, I could see Georgia limiting Notre Dame's offense more so than a Bama's or a Clemson's or an Ohio State's. But Notre Dame's offense, you saw what they did. You saw what they did to Clemson. Trevor Lawrence doesn't play defense, folks. Notre Dame put up big points against Clemson. You mean to tell me Georgia can limit Notre Dame's offense with Ian Book playing solid, Kyron Williams running the football? I don't think so. Not gonna hold them all night. Believe me, they won't. And forget Iowa State. I feel like Miami would have a better chance at a shootout against those teams than teams like Georgia and Iowa State. You mean Miami over those two? So that to me was really those were the biggest takeaways. You know, in addition to breaking down our darling Cincinnati and their path to the playoff, the 8, 9, 10 spots are going to be huge down the line. Because it's big for Iowa State because they could still win a conference title and they could sneak their way up the ladder. They could hop Cincinnati. They could hop a Florida if they have 2 losses. And frankly, if Iowa State, and I just want to double check their schedule real quick, how many games they have left, they have West Virginia left on the schedule as of now. And then they would play Oklahoma, I believe. Looks like based on the tiebreakers right now, excuse me, in the Big 12 championship game. So if you beat Oklahoma twice, that's quality to me. But it's a 9-2 Big 12 champion, Iowa State, going to be above Texas A&M if Texas A&M wins out? Possibly. Iowa State would need, Bama to win. They would need Notre Dame to win. Similar to Cincinnati here. So the two spots are locked in. But Clemson's out. Florida's out. That's 2 less spots, right? So hypothetically, Iowa State's now 7. Let's just do this quick math in our head. Iowa State's now in the 7th spot. Do you weigh a 2-loss Big 12 champion higher than Cincinnati? Well, they're below them right now, and Cincinnati still has 2 games left to go 10-0. That's a big deal. That double-digit wins. So now it's a fact of this Iowa State jump. They would jump Georgia definitely. So we'll put them at 6 now. They're a top 6 team. Are they going to jump Cincinnati and Texas A&M at that point? That's what the committee has to weigh when it comes to a 2-loss Power 5 conference champion. Something that, you know, the only time that ever happened was when Penn State won the Big Ten a couple years ago, and they had 2 losses already. But one of the teams they beat, Ohio State, their only loss was to Penn State, but Ohio State still got in because the committee was so against 2-loss teams in the playoff. It's going to be fascinating. It's going to be fascinating. By the way, Iowa State has plus 15,000. Plus 15,000 on the odds to win the national championship, by the way. Same odds as BYU. And Iowa State they have a remote shot, in my opinion, to get to the playoff when BYU probably not. All right, we'll step aside, take a quick break. On the other side, we'll dive into more of the games this weekend. Then we'll dive into my 5 picks of the weekend as well. Keep it locked here. It's College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio, presented by Harbor Jiu Jitsu.
Betting college football? You've come to the right place. It's College Football Pick'em, presented by Harbor Jiu Jitsu on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio.
College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. I'm your host, Nick Kosko. We are presented by Harbor Jiu Jitsu. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at NickKosko59, NickKosko59. And, of course, follow the station at 1490 Sports Bet on Twitter. Follow my guys Rich Quinones and Ryan Rothstein at RichQ1Q and at WiseRye. They are some of our fellow hosts on this very station. Back Your Play and The Fix, respectively, throughout the week. All right. For Texas. Now, you hate to talk about coaches that are bound to get fired or should be fired. Or it just seems like they're going to be fired. And again, I'm still not on that train for Jim Harbaugh, despite what Rich wants to tell me. Jim Harbaugh for Michigan has not panned out the way they wanted to. But he's done a more quality job than I'd say a guy like Tom Herman. Now, Tom Herman has a Sugar Bowl. Oh, yeah, he's got a Sugar Bowl a couple years ago. Don't forget, folks. Remember the whole famous post-game speech from quarterback Sam Ehlinger, who's still here, by the way, in his final year. Remember? We're back. Remember that? Texas is back. They won the Sugar Bowl because they went to the Sugar Bowl because they couldn't win the Big 12, by the way. Don't forget. And granted, Tom Herman's 3-0 in bowl games. They won the Texas Bowl his first year there. They were 7-6 overall. The very next year, they're 10-4. 10-4, folks. They had 4 losses. That's the best season so far for Texas under Tom Herman. Won the Sugar Bowl, but they did not, I repeat, did not win the Big 12. They lost 39-27 to Oklahoma, to Kyler Murray and Oklahoma. So no college football playoff, no conference title for Tom Herman. And then just last year, 8-5, and they won the Alamo Bowl. All right, come on. The Alamo Bowl. Now, as a Rutgers guy, of course, I would take any bowl victory at this point. I'm sure they'll get back there eventually under Schiano, but, I get it. But at Texas, you have expectations. Mac Brown-type expectations. National championships. Big 12 titles. And these days, college football playoff appearances. Been none of that. They haven't won a title since 2006. They haven't been to the game since 2009. Remember they got beat up by Alabama? Now, granted, Colt McCoy got hurt in the game. And it swayed the game in Bama's favor, but where's Texas been since then? Jim Harbaugh, on the other hand, for Michigan, has 3 10-win seasons. They've never gotten to the Big Ten championship game, though, because he hasn't beaten Ohio State. And he's had his troubles against Michigan State as well. And he's also 1-4 in bowl games in his first 5 years in Michigan. Only winning the Citrus Bowl back in 2015. But they've lost the Orange Bowl, New Year's Six game. Lost the Outback Bowl. Lost the Peach Bowl, a New Year's Six game back in 2018. And then they lost the Citrus Bowl last year. So at least Tom Herman has, he's got a New Year's Six Bowl under his belt at Texas. Now, granted, you can make the argument that both should be out after this year. I'm going to make it more so for Tom Herman to be out. And that's because I dislike Tom Herman. It's because you're in the Big 12 where you don't have the historically great Ohio State team beating you up every year. You have Oklahoma, and granted, Oklahoma went on a fantastic run, and now Oklahoma's back in there again. Oklahoma's back in the running again for the Big 12 after a slow start to this season. So that does show how good Oklahoma is. But Texas lost to Oklahoma. They had a prime. This was the year for Texas to beat Oklahoma. Oklahoma stumbling out of the gate a little bit with Spencer Rattler, a redshirt freshman quarterback. Lincoln Riley has his first homegrown quarterback, but maybe has to take a year to really develop him, and then maybe in 2021 is where they get back to where they were with Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, and Jalen Hurts over the last 3 years, where they're Big 12 champions and they're in the college football playoff. Forget about that. Texas lost that game. They lost the Red River. They dropped to 2-2 after 4 games. Now don't forget, Texas was 2-0 to start the year, and they were number 8 in the country in the AP poll. And they lose 33-31. They get upset by TCU at home, folks. At home. Inexcusable. You can't lose to TCU at home when you're a top 10 team in the country. You can't do it. You can't do it. But they did. Still number 22. And guess what happened in Red River? You can not erase all of it, but you can get that stink out of your clothes, so to speak, by beating Oklahoma. And they couldn't do it. Lost in overtime, 4 overtimes. They couldn't do it, despite a valiant effort from Sam Ehlinger, because this team can't play defense. Don't forget, remember when they beat Texas Tech, folks, week 2, they won 63-56 in overtime, and that's because they had a late miraculous comeback to score 14 points, and I believe in less than a minute, if memory serves me right, back in late September. So realistically, this team should have been 1-3 if Texas Tech doesn't blow that game. They beat Baylor by 11. Okay. Now they had a big win over Oklahoma State's their big win, because Oklahoma State was number 6 at the time. You beat them in overtime. Okay. But 2 of your best wins of the year are in overtime. One over Texas Tech in a shootout, and then another shootout against Oklahoma State. But that's a quality win, and it was on the road. They're back to number 21. They have 2 losses. College football playoff, probably out of the question, but Big 12 championship hopes alive again. They beat West Virginia, but they just beat them by 4. Close win. West Virginia, no, but not to be trifled with, though, this year. Then comes last week. Now, Iowa State's really good. Brock Purdy, quarterback, Breece Hall, running back. Got a good offense, great head coach, and Matt Campbell. Matt Campbell, for all we know, could be the next Michigan head coach. Matt Campbell's doing a great job at Iowa State. And we know Iowa State's number 9 now, as we discussed in the previous segment. But you're at home, if you're Texas, and you lose to Iowa State at home, when this is your chance to make a move, get a huge win, and have a chance to play for a Big 12 championship in a couple weeks. Now you're 4-3 in the conference. You're 5-3 overall. You're out of the top 25, and you're not getting there. Iowa State's clinched their spot. Texas beat Oklahoma State, so they could leapfrog them, but they can't leapfrog Oklahoma. Can't do it. You would need Oklahoma to lose their last 2 games. So they're not mathematically eliminated, as they like to say. They're not mathematically eliminated from the Big 12 championship game. But Oklahoma would have to lose to Baylor and West Virginia back-to-back weeks to give Texas a shot. And Oklahoma State would need to drop a game, which TCU and Baylor is possible. Maybe they drop one. But what would it say for Tom Herman, unless they win the Big 12? They luckily get in, they would miraculously get in, sheer luck, but then they beat Iowa State in a rematch. I mean, if they got in, I could actually see that. They could beat Iowa State in a rematch, which would be kind of hilarious when you think about it. Because just imagine this. Texas is 5-3, right? Let's say, they have Kansas State and Kansas. You would think they would win those games, finish 7-3 in the regular season, and then if luck somehow broke their way, where Oklahoma loses out, which I don't think is going to happen at all, and Oklahoma State does lose one game, all of a sudden Texas is your second team in the Big 12 title game. To me, this is the only way Tom Herman saves his job. If they luck their way into the Big 12 title game and they beat Iowa State and they split the series, but they win a conference title, that's the only way that they save Tom Herman's job. Because if they win the Big 12 and they finish, what would it be, 8-3, do they get a New Year's Six bowl berth? I mean, I would think at that point, if they blow out the next 2 teams, they're probably back into the top 25, maybe near the end. And then I would say they probably get a New Year's Six bowl berth if they win the Big 12 as the Power 5 conference, and Iowa State is obviously knocking on the door for a dark horse as a college football playoff contender. But that's the only way Tom Herman saves his job. Jim Harbaugh, to me, is going to stay one more year, unless he wants to leave. I don't think Michigan in good conscience can just fire him or say we're going to mutually part ways after this season unless Harbaugh already has something lined up for 2021 in the NFL or somehow another college job. That's why I don't think Harbaugh's going anywhere. He'll be back for one more year to play out, to coach out his contract. Herman, on the other hand, Texas donors, Texas football. They're getting beat in state in recruiting now by Texas A&M. Baylor and TCU are poaching guys. Hell, SMU could be poaching guys as well from Texas. They're obviously getting beat in the arms race from Oklahoma and Oklahoma State just up north, and then even you see SEC teams like Bama and Auburn poaching top Texas talent. If it's not working with Tom Herman, Texas, don't get into a Michigan situation where you're hanging on to a guy too long. Now, Michigan's a little bit different, of course, because Harbaugh is one of their own. Tom Herman came over from Houston. You could cut ties easier with Tom Herman than you can with Jim Harbaugh. But Jim Harbaugh, he's an alum, former Michigan star, quarterback. He has the NFL pedigree. He's shown he can do it at the college level before. And aside from the Ohio State bugaboo, Jim Harbaugh has been a pretty solid coach at Michigan. Tom Herman, meanwhile, where's the impressive season besides 2018? An 8-5 year in 2019. Alamo Bowl victory. You just finished in the top 25 in the AP poll. Okay, it's great. That's not Texas standard. Go back to last year. This team was 5-4 in conference play. 5-4. There are 10 teams in the Big 12. They were sixth. They were sixth in the Big 12 last year. Sixth. Despite finishing the season ranked, based on tiebreakers, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and Iowa State, all 5-4 in the conference as well. They were above Texas in those standings because how's that possible? They lost to Iowa State. They beat Kansas State and Oklahoma State, but based on other common opponents, when it all comes down to it, you were tied for third. Technically listed as sixth. All right? To me, Tom Herman took a dip after last year. Baylor, 11-3, finished the year. They finished the year 11-3, right? They edged them out. Baylor beat them. Okay, you beat Texas. You beat Utah in the Alamo Bowl. That's great. Utah, after they lost the Pac-12 championship last year, took a nosedive. Utah was everyone's darling last year, number 5 overall when they played Oregon in the Pac-12 title game. If Utah wins, they probably go to the playoff. They took an absolute nosedive before they played Texas. Tom Herman didn't buy himself that much more time. And with the losses this year, you lose to Oklahoma. That's your rival. That's like Harbaugh losing to Ohio State. And then speaking of Iowa State, Herman loses that game too. When you're the head coach of Texas, you can't lose those games. You just can't. You can't do it. He was good at Houston, 13-1, 9-3 back-to-back years, and Texas took a shot. They need to inject life into the program. They did, because Texas hasn't been the same since Mac Brown. They really haven't. But you throw Charlie Strong in there, and among others, you need fresh blood. And Herman seemed to be like the next up-and-coming young head coach. And he came from the Urban Meyer coaching tree. He was Urban Meyer's offensive coordinator at Ohio State. It's not like this guy forgot how to coach. It's just that I don't think he's eventually going to be cut. He's not cut out for the job at Texas, for their expectations. When you bring in a guy like Herman, who has the pedigree of learning under Urban Meyer, takes a team like Houston. Houston won the Peach Bowl back in 2015, don't forget. They were a top 10 team. Took a bit of a dip the next year, but when you're 22-4 in 2 years at Houston, and you're battling other teams like Texas A&M, Baylor, TCU, Power 5 teams in your own state for recruits, and you do that, yeah, it's like, oh wow, if we give Herman the Texas Longhorns resources, we can win those recruiting battles. We can run the Big 12. We'll keep more Texas talent in state. We'll keep them at the university, at the place to be in Texas, away from the Oklahomas, the Oklahoma States, or from going out east to Alabama, Mississippi State, Auburn, or the Floridas and Georgias of the world. We'll keep that Texas talent right here, centralized. That hasn't happened. The recruiting classes are good. Not good enough. Based on Texas standards and what that school wants to hold that football team to the high standard, the Vince Young era of the world, even when Mac Brown took Colt McCoy and company to the championship game, despite losing to Bama, that's where Texas should be in contention for every year. But look at now at the playoff. Because now you have a playoff. If you're top 4, you have a chance to win a title, a national championship. They haven't gotten close. They have not gotten close. Go back to 2018 when they won that Sugar Bowl. First game of the year. Don't forget, they lost to Maryland. First game of the year. Reel off 6 wins in a row, great. And you lose to Oklahoma State and West Virginia. They got back to number 6, folks. And they blew it by losing to Oklahoma State on the road. Then back-to-back losses. West Virginia the very next week. Then they win 3 in a row again. Texas Tech, Iowa State, Kansas. Great. Now you have Red River. You're back to number 9. Oklahoma's number 5. You win that game, you're back in the playoff conversation. Because that's your Big 12 championship game. You already beat Oklahoma earlier in the year. Oklahoma's 5, you're 9. You might be able to get to the playoff if you win that football game. Plus, you're a Big 12 champion. And they didn't do it. Lost by 12. They're always right there, Texas, right there. Some years, it just seems like no matter if they're going to be a top team this year or they're going to be average. But if you're going to be, if it's an average football team, a coach should be able to take that average football team and make them a good football team. If you're a good football team, that coach should be able to make them a great football team. You make do with what you have. And to me, Tom Herman has not done that. So, open up the checkbook, folks. Down in Austin, open up the checkbook and give Urban Meyer whatever the hell he wants. You want to get back to national prominence like that? Go get Urban Meyer. It's the only way. All right, we'll step aside, take a quick break. Once again, on the other side of my 5 picks coming up. We changed one game, as I mentioned earlier in the show. And if you forget, well, you'll have to come back and listen to my 5 picks. 27, 26, and 2 on the season. Over 500, folks. We are doing good over the last couple of weeks. We are going 3-2. It's still over 500, though, and we're making money. So be sure to listen to my 5 picks coming up in the next segment right here on College Football Pick'em, right here on AM 1490, Sports Betting Radio, presented by Harbor Jiu Jitsu.
Now back to College Football Pick'em with Nick Kosko, presented by Harbor Jiu Jitsu on AM 1490, Sports Betting Radio.
Welcome back to College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. I'm your host, Nick Kosko. We are presented by Harbor Jiu Jitsu, located inside the Attilas Gym in Egg Harbor Township. Be sure to check them out. HarborJiu-Jitsu.com, folks. The website is up, and it's a good one. My guy, Al Bruce, did a nice job building that one, so we're finally up and live on the web as well. Of course, you can follow them on Instagram and give them a like on Facebook. Check them out, but check out the website, HarborJiu-Jitsu.com. Harbor, and then it's JIUJITSU.com, HarborJiu-Jitsu.com. Find out about your free trial class if you want to get in on it as well. All right, it is picks time in my world over here. So 27, 26, and 2 on the year. We are over 500. We had one change. We went from Liberty, Coastal Carolina to BYU, Coastal Carolina. But we are going to start with, that's right, my alma mater, Rutgers. They host Penn State today. And I'll tell you what, that's a big game. And again, 1-5 Penn State, 2-4 Rutgers. You would think, why in the world is this actually a big game? I'm going to tell you why. Because Penn State got the monkey off their back last week beating Michigan, right? Got that first win. Can you imagine if there was an 0-6? And I told this Rich on Wednesday on Back Your Play. I said, can you imagine if Penn State was 0-6 coming into this game, knowing that they were staring down the barrel of a winless season, and they had to go on the road to Rutgers, which is coming off a big road victory over Purdue, 2-4, rebuilding. But can you imagine, in Greg Schiano's first year back, he gets Rutgers to 3-4 after 7 games, and one of those wins over Penn State, no matter the record, but Penn State loses that game and falls to 0-7. Can you imagine the discrepancy right there? 0-7 Penn State, 3-4 Rutgers. I don't care if it's 2020. That is alarming if you're a Penn State fan, if you're a Penn State alum, wherever you are. If you're associated with Penn State, that's alarming based on where Rutgers has been over the last 4 years, particularly the last 5 years. If you have to go all the way back to 2014 when there was a true competitive game between these two teams. Now there's been 2 games where they've been moderately close, but Rutgers and Penn State have not played a truly tight game since 2014. That was Rutgers' first Big Ten game ever. First conference game ever in the Big Ten was against Penn State at home, a 13-10 loss to Penn State, and reason for that was due to five turnovers, 5 interceptions from Gary Nova. Now Gary Nova in the record books for Rutgers, but when you have 5 picks, you're probably not going to win the football game. But that was it. Rutgers can claim almost victory against this team. They've beaten them once ever. So Greg Schiano already said this is not a rivalry until Rutgers actually wins. And right now that line got it at plus 12.5. Rutgers at home, and you know where I'm going. We've done a couple Rutgers games this year, but I have a funny feeling about this one. Whether they win or lose, and you would think at this point, as Rutgers fans, of course, that you have a really good shot to win because Penn State is down the dumps this year, and they got as I said before, the monkey off their back. They finally got that first win, so they're not playing with chickens. They're not going to play like chickens with their heads cut off against Rutgers if they were like they would if they were winless. If they were winless, then it's desperation time. Then all sorts of crazy things can happen. They're not as desperate this week, which leads me to pick Rutgers here at plus 12.5 at home. Whether they win or lose, beside the point. On this show, we worry about if they're going to cover. Now, when I watch the actual game, I'm going to really hope for them to win to finally knock off this darn team across state lines. So, give me Rutgers plus 12.5 against Penn State at home. All right, Nebraska-Purdue, fascinating game in the Big Ten from a betting perspective, as Purdue opened up as a 2-point favorite, and that line actually shifted. And we're going to make note of this, folks, because it is significant in the grand scheme of things to 1.5. So now we have Purdue minus 1.5, and yes, that is my pick, Purdue minus 1.5, because the way they played against Rutgers last week, now granted, Purdue could score. They can score, but they lost. That was a bad, to me, that was a bad loss to Rutgers, because Rutgers just kept fighting and fighting and fighting. Purdue had multiple chances to put them away, so it wasn't good for the Boilermakers. Now, Purdue has some playmakers on offense. Nebraska, I don't know what in the world is going on with Nebraska. They rotate quarterbacks with Adrian Martinez and the freshman Luke McCaffrey, and yes, that's Christian McCaffrey's youngest brother. They rotate quarterbacks. They don't seem to have any direction. Scott Frost is doing, I don't know what he's doing. It's like Jim Harbaugh going back to Michigan, except they're not winning. Scott Frost was so successful at Central Florida. That team was undefeated and claimed a national championship. And Scott Frost goes to Nebraska, where he was a quarterback, hometown kid. Bring him back. Nebraska's going to go back to prominence in the Big Ten, and they're 1-4 this year. They haven't been anywhere towards successful under Scott Frost so far. And it's actually mind-boggling. I figured he would do a better job because the Big Ten West is a little bit weaker than the Big Ten East, to say the least, in terms of the big brands in the conference. What are you doing? You're dealing with Wisconsin. That's it. Wisconsin, Purdue, Illinois, and come on, Minnesota. I don't care about PJ Flex roll the boat. Look at Minnesota this year. Northwestern. Granted, they're good this year, but Northwestern. You mean to tell me Nebraska can't out-recruit Northwestern in that division? Iowa, that's maybe it. Iowa and Wisconsin, who else are you worrying about? It's not like you're in the Big Ten East where you have Ohio State, Michigan State, and Penn State battling it out every year. Now that Schiano's back at Rutgers, New Jersey talent is staying in state. And don't forget about Maryland. Maryland can recruit too. Hell, Indiana can recruit. Look at Indiana with Tom Allen this year. You mean to tell me Nebraska can't compete in this conference, or in that division at least? It's mind-boggling. I'm surprised Purdue is not a bigger favorite in this game, despite their 2-3 record. So give me Purdue minus 1.5. They have some good offensive talent, especially Rondale Moore, their wide receiver. He's gonna be he's a first-round talent at wide receiver. All right, next game we have Florida and Tennessee. This is a bigger line than I usually like, but we took a chance with Clemson last week at home, minus 24 against Pittsburgh, and they covered that one. And the fact that Florida's offense is clicking so much right now with Kyle Trask, Kyle Pitts is back as well. They're a star tight end, but Trask is playing at just such a high level right now. It's Joe Burrow-esque, because you look at I've said this multiple times throughout the last couple of weeks. If you extrapolate Kyle Trask's stats over a Joe Burrow type year, then you're going to get Joe Burrow numbers. And what I mean by that is, Trask has played 8 games. He's got 34 touchdowns, 2,800 yards, only 3 picks. If you stretch his stats out to over 15 games, like Burrow last year, this kid's throwing for over 60 touchdowns. He's throwing 60, 61 touchdowns, and maybe 5, 6, 7 picks. That's it. Is he going to reach the 5,000-yard mark? It's going to be close. It'll be darn close. He's not going to be Burrow's passing yardage. Burrow had almost 5,700 yards. But Trask could push for 5,000 yards. But the touchdown numbers are going to be the same, if not better. Same with the interception numbers. I mean, Trask is playing absolutely ridiculous right now. So, I feel like Florida could put up 50 points in this game because Tennessee is garbage right now. I don't care if this game is on the road. Tennessee is in no man's land. And they probably wish, again, this is me tooting my own horn as a Rutgers fan and alum. Tennessee probably wishes they hired Greg Schiano now, 3 years later, and not Jeremy Pruitt. Give me Florida minus 17.5. All right, Texas and Kansas State. We just spent our time roasting Texas. And we're going to roast them again, folks, because Kansas State is +7 right now, and I like Kansas State. Kansas State's only really this big of a home dog is because they don't have their quarterback in Skylar Thompson. They have Deuce Vaughn running the football. That's it, though. Can Texas rebound from that emotional letdown last week? It's possible, but I don't know. I don't trust Texas, and I just found this line too enticing because the fact that Kansas State is a home dog, I feel like even if they don't win this game outright, they're going to be a pain in the rear end for Texas. So I do like the Wildcats here, +7 at home. Finally, BYU, Coastal Carolina. BYU finally getting that ranked game, and if BYU is any shot at a New Year's Six Bowl, they have to win this game. And Coastal Carolina, too, by the way. I mean, they can maybe make an argument for one. Because either way, this will be a top 20 win for either one of these teams, and they'll be in line to be undefeated, right? BYU has Coastal Carolina on the road, 5:30 today, ranked matchup. They win. By the way, they're -10 now. Coastal Carolina was -11 at home against Liberty, and now they're a 10-point dog to BYU. BYU has Zach Wilson, Heisman contender, could be a first-round pick, could be a top 15 pick for all we know. So he is really, really good. We want to talk about quarterbacks numbers. We're talking about Zach Wilson at BYU. They have San Diego State next week, so BYU can be 11-0 and then have that argument say, hey, if you're not going to put us in the playoff, at least put us in the New Year's Six. We beat a top 20 team already. I mean, come on. They never beat Army. Army at the time was ranked, so that takes away from BYU a little bit as well. But for Coastal Carolina, I mean, they are rolling through the Sun Belt. I'll tell you what, Coastal Carolina is one of the biggest surprises of the season for how well they're playing. Coastal's schedule, not that great, although they beat Louisiana, Louisiana is a top 25 victory for Coastal Carolina. They beat them on the road, by the way. So that's a resume-boosting win for Coastal Carolina. And they play them again, by the way. They're going to play them again in the conference championship game. Coastal Carolina can be a maximum of 12-0. Imagine if they beat Louisiana twice. You beat BYU, you dominate Troy next week, and then you beat Louisiana in the conference title game in a couple weeks. Oh boy, 12-0 Coastal Carolina. You mean to tell me? I know they're the Sun Belt, but I mean you might have to give the Chanticleers some New Year's Six love. And guess what, folks? I like the way BYU's playing, but +10 at home. Coastal just gets that huge 21-point swing based on their opponent. I'll tell you what, I'm going to take Coastal here, +10 at home. So just a quick recap of our picks real quick. Penn State at Rutgers, we have Rutgers +12.5. We have Purdue -1.5 against Nebraska at home. We have Florida -17.5 on the road against Tennessee. Kansas State +7 at home against Texas. And we have Coastal Carolina +10 at home against BYU. 27, 26, and 2 on the year. Let's hope we go 5-0 this week. First 5-0 week of the season. Can only hope, folks. Put your money down. Get ready for a great day in college football. That's going to do it for me. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week. Hopefully we're still over 500. And go Scarlet Knights and go Chanticleers. How about that? It's been College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio, presented by Harbor Jiu Jitsu.